right, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, May 2nd, 2024. David Parsons here. Welcome to News Trap. I am going to share this episode of News Trap on the main Nostalgia Trap feed so that everybody can hear a little bit of what we're doing on the Patreon page for subscribers. So if you like what you hear today and you're not a subscriber, go check it out. I think you can actually sign up for free for 7 days. If you don't like it after that, just cancel it. No big whoop. No hurt feelings. I love you anyway. And thanks for listening to the show. I want to today give some sample of the kind of insanity that goes on in my text messages talking with Justin and Andrew about the news. In fact, that's sort of like the main idea I want to get across is the screenshots and sort of snippets from the media, from social media that I think are important one way or another, not necessarily endorsements, but sort of like pictures of what's going on. And also on News Trap, I've been sharing recommendations for books and movies, things that I think maybe you haven't paid attention to that you should. Yesterday, we talked about Paul Auster. Today, I'm not doing books and movies. Today, I want to get into the hard news. I want to get into what the actual content of these screenshots are today, because today was a good one. Justin sent some really great shit, and there are a bunch of different broad categories, so let me just get right into it. The first thing I want to mention is the Robert F. Kennedy campaign. Is anybody paying attention to RFK Jr.? I've actually heard a few people in like real life be like, dude, I think RFK is the guy, actually. I think he's a Kennedy, you know, that sort of thing. And I'm like, really? I mean, he seems like an absolute fucking psycho to me. But here's a great clip from the New York Times about how that campaign is going. Kennedy has made it onto the ballot in a few states so far, though his campaign and a super PAC supporting him have said they have met requirements in several others. Polls, including a recent Wall Street Journal battleground survey, show he has low support overall. He generally polls slightly more voters from Trump than President Biden, though he also draws key Democratic demographics such as young voters and Latinos. Campaign staff have on their calendars an optional invite to Sunday prayer circles, where a reverend who heads a group that opposes vaccination requirements for children leads a prayer for Kennedy's divine protection. The campaign posts videos of the prayer circles on YouTube. A lot of us feel like we're in a movie all the time, said one former aide. The dysfunction, aides said, has manifested itself in an absence of strategy for appealing to Trump's or Biden's supporters. They said the campaign has made scant effort to understand either group of voters. Some top officials have privately dismissed Trump voters as extremists, while others have indicated that they assumed that Kennedy's positions on COVID and vaccines would be enough to reel the Trump voters in without making further effort, former aides said. So, they're running their campaign just about as fucking stupid as RFK sounds when he talks. That doesn't surprise me at all that they're inept, fucking incompetent shitheads. I think that RFK thought like, oh, there's an anti-vax contingent, so I'll just say that into a microphone a lot and do a bunch of fucking podcasts, and somehow that'll win the American electorate. Sorry, RFK, I have nothing but contempt for you. And God, sounds like your campaign fucking sucks anyway. So nothing to fear from the RFK Jr. campaign. Maybe we'll get a few laughs out of it. And that's about it. Okay. The other thing that Justin sent me today is about cars. We talk a lot about cars on the show. Cars are changing. And the one thing that I think is the overarching fact is that cars are fucking becoming computers. Cars are becoming phones. And as cars, and you write into the industrial manufacture of automobiles, you write that into the industrial manufacturing of tech like computers, what you've got is mixing two industries. And that part is something that I think the auto industry is going to be figuring out for a long fucking time. And it's probably going to, as Justin puts it, drip into other industries as well. You've heard about the CHIPS Act. You've heard about the semiconductor problem. You've heard about the kind of idea that national governments are frantically trying to secure supply lines for the things you need to make cars now, which is basically making computers. So as we've underlined on the show, that just like adds a lot of juice into the idea of state capitalism as the main show that's going on the globe right now. Is national governments are frantically trying to secure their ability to manufacture or produce or import the bullshit that their consumers need. And that's the game. So here's a great take on that. Critics say, this is from the New York Times. Critics say the risk for Europe is that it wastes billions of taxpayer dollars on projects or sectors that don't become self-sustaining or competitive. That would further undermine the continent's costly social welfare model and leave Europeans poorer, not richer. For automobiles, one of Europe's top exports, the industry is intertwined with other key sectors such as semiconductors and batteries, both areas in focus for subsidies. I'm not saying there aren't benefits from saving parts of Europe's car industry, says Jacob Kierkegaard, senior fellow at the Peterson Institute. The question is, at what price? And that brings you to like Tesla and Elon Musk. You may have heard that Tesla fired their supercharger team, which I just want to underline how fucking crazy it is for Musk to have fired 500 people on the supercharger team, because he left all of the small contractors and small business guys completely in the dark. And that's the people who were developing the systems of chargers that were supposed to be the standard chargers across the United States. It's something we've talked about a lot about electric cars, right? You get outside of the cities and nobody has a fucking electric car because there are no chargers. You're not going to drive thousands of miles to go sit in a fucking parking lot and try to charge your car somewhere when there aren't chargers anywhere. It doesn't make any sense. There's a gas station on every corner. So that logic is breaking down. And that part of it, like, you know, Tesla said, well, we'll be the standard charger and we'll put this shit all over the United States. All the other car industries can use our charger if they just have like one of those little like Apple dongles, right? You need one of those. You need a converter. But either way, Tesla's promise was, don't worry, we're like Apple. We're going to put the fucking chargers everywhere so that you don't have to worry about it. And anyone, Chevy, Ford, whatever, you can use them. That's what dried up. That's what Tesla is backing out of. That's what Elon Musk just fired, that entire team. So that part of it's pretty fucking crazy. Here's a clip about that from, the New York Times. Adam Gordon, managing partner at New York City-based developer Wildflower, said the company was nearly at the finish line after 7 or 8 months of lease negotiations with Tesla for a supercharger site in Queens. Tuesday morning, Gordon had a text from his contact at Tesla which said that the group working on the project had been laid off in a 4 a.m. email. He hasn't heard from anyone from Tesla so far. Our perspective is that this kind of behavior doesn't leave us with a sense that we have a reliable counterparty no matter what they say. So, Tesla is not a reliable counterparty to other businesses. I mean, let alone consumers themselves, who are going to have to, I guess, pay more money now and not have chargers anywhere. Tesla fucking sucks, dude. And like listening to this shit, like there's so much of it. And I try honestly not to share every screenshot that makes Tesla and Elon Musk in particular look like complete fucking incompetent assholes. But I think the Tesla moment is drying up. And I mean, the numbers are there. They've saturated their market. Whoever was going to buy a Tesla has already bought one. There's not going to be a beautiful future. Although, you know, I've seen this shit go all sorts of ways. I've been on this planet long enough to know that, you know, declaring things over prematurely will make you look like a fool. So I'm not going to bury Tesla just yet. I'm going to just say that, you know, according to a lot of press that's sort of, I don't know, surveying the larger forces at work here, Tesla's not the only electric car manufacturer on the block anymore. And those contradictions of like who pays for the chargers, where are the chargers, none of that shit is settled. All that shit is sort of up in the air. And I think that's part of why I'm cynical about the electric car thing. And I certainly don't see electric cars as having anything to do with rescuing the world from climate change or dealing with any of that stuff. It's just cynical capitalism. Justin also sent some stuff this morning, incredibly depressing. This is some fucked up shit. School shootings, they've just become normalized. And like, I don't want to go back into the nostalgia trap and the memory of Columbine in 1999, but like, that was shocking, and that was on the news months afterwards, like months after Columbine. It was still the top story in the news. To live through an era of the 2 decades since Columbine, watch school shootings become a sort of quotidian event, a normal thing, is just there's a monstrosity to that. There's a reason to be, I think, sick about that. But here's some sick clips about that statistically. Shootings and guns being pulled out on K through 12 campuses in U.S. schools have grown in frequency in recent years, according to data from the K through 12 School Shooting Database, a nonprofit that tracks incidents. According to the group, there have been at least 115 such incidents this year, and in 82 of those cases, someone was injured or killed. Incidents include a fatal April 24th shooting at a high school in Arlington, Texas, that left an 18-year-old dead. A 17-year-old has been arrested on a warrant for murder in the case, the Associated Press reported. In March, a high school student and adult were shot outside North Kansas City High School in Missouri following a basketball game. And on January 4th, 11-year-old Amir Jalif was shot and killed after a 17-year-old opened fire outside a high school in Perry, Iowa, where 7 others, including the school's principal, were injured. So, the fact that there have been 82 school shootings at K through 12 schools this year, and it's not just like, gang violence in the shitty city. It's in it's in Iowa, it's in these farm places. It's in the suburbs. It's everywhere. And that part of it, that sort of like normalization of just like disputes will happen at school and guns will come out, it's Deadwood, man. It's like fucking Deadwood Junior. Maybe they should make like a Deadwood for kids, right? Like this is like a gun crazy fucking country, and it's just gonna be normal for fucking 14-year-olds to pull pistols out in the parking lot on the way into school. That's fucked up. And that part of it is really depressing, in part because we are failing our young people, right? And I mean, I hate that. I hate that kind of take on it, but it falls into the Palestine shit that I was ranting about earlier this week on News Trap, the campus protest stuff. It's just like, ultimately, despite all of the sort of detailed politics of Israel and Gaza and all that, the basic bottom line for me is that young people are growing up in a monstrous time. The school shootings are just one part of it, but violence is there, right? And like the violent element, the idea of young people in college who are already sort of learning about stuff that they hadn't heard before, specifically things about history and about the way that the way the world works. At the same time, they're seeing like people, specifically like innocent civilians, being massacred in war on TikTok. That drives people crazy. And I think that's part of what I mean when I say we're failing our young people. It's just kind of like, I remember being young and I remember being overwhelmed by the quote unquote world. But it's a particularly rough one now. And that's part of why I think I have to take a step back off it and sort of look at how young people are reacting in that context. That being said, not every young person is obviously like a global intifada revolutionary campus protester. In fact, the vast majority of young people are not involved in that. And I do wonder, sort of, where are they? How are they experiencing this one way or the other? Because we're all living in that world. Okay, I'm gonna try not to fall into cliche here. Let's move forward. Justin also shared some. He also often shares stuff about China. China is obviously like a key part of thinking about this move towards like hyper nationalism and hyper state capitalism that we're seeing in the last a decade at least, but I think accelerating now, particularly the militaristic element of that nationalism starting to express itself all over the world. And there's this concept that like Ukraine is an important place, not just because of what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, but because of how the rest of the world is dumping weapons into that region, and how Western Europe is looking over there and sweating, thinking about the future, thinking about the involvement of massive states like China and Russia and the United States in that war, and if it will spread or not. We talk about that a lot, and there are a couple of screenshots I want to get into. In particular, China's militarization. It's sort of starting to prepare for war. Here's a clip about that from the Financial Times. In 2014, Xi introduced the concept of comprehensive national security encompassing multiple aspects of the economy and society, according to the EU Chamber report. This has been going on for at least about 8 to 10 years, says the chair professor of finance at the University of Hong Kong, of China's shift to an industrial policy that takes into account war preparation. Ideology and geopolitics also play roles. For Xi, China's most powerful leader since Mao, the greater the control his country exerts over global supply chains, the more secure he feels, particularly as tensions rise with the United States. This leads to an emphasis on investment, particularly in technology, rather than consumption. Under Xi, security has also increasingly taken precedence over growth. Self-reliance in manufacturing under extreme circumstances, even armed conflict, is an important part of this. China should be prepared for war, says Liu Jin, senior researcher at Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at the University of China. The conflicts in Europe and currently in the Middle East have repeatedly proven the importance of maintaining a robust manufacturing capacity and ample inventory. So there's this sort of positioning happening where China is in the midst of a massive economic shift, and those are the kinds of things that make the rest of the world nervous. And we've got Xi, who's a strongman and a guy who's honestly to the right of Ronald Reagan, who calls himself a communist. And that's kind of interesting. Like, listen to this. The reasons Chinese people save so much range from a lack of good investment options, especially with property in the doldrums, to inadequate social welfare and healthcare. The IMF calculates China spends 8% of GDP on social protection schemes, slightly more than the United States, but half of Japan. While Xi has declared China's ambition to build, quote, a great modern socialist country, he said it must not fall into the trap of welfarism that encourages laziness. So I just want to fucking underline that, because the idea that like China is like the vanguard of socialism and communism in the world, when they spend half of what Japan spends on social welfare, when their people have to save money for retirement because they don't get it, when their fucking leader says that people on welfare are fucking lazy, that means you've got a fucking conservative Republican capitalist named Xi, who calls himself a communist, running that country. That is amazing to me. And this is, Justin is actually much more ecstatic about that news than I am. This is Justin. Justin's a little, what's great about these texts is I also get Justin's commentary. So here's Justin. He says, I love that the world's leading communist hates welfare and is to the right of Reagan. And I love that the world's biggest socialist state of all time spends so little on welfare that households have to constantly save for their own social security and therefore can't consume and therefore can't pull the overall economy up. And Xi doesn't mind because he needs manufacturing to lead the way for war. Amazing, amazing shit. So that's Justin on those screenshots. And I'll leave that there as we move on to a couple other things that I want to mention. Okay, there's this great piece in the Financial Times today, sort of considering the big picture of the campus revolutions that are happening right now. And again, this isn't necessarily to endorse any of the ideas. I've been reading a lot of, obviously, different perspectives on what's going on with the students, how it fits into the election, whether or not the campuses are actually going to be occupied and taken over, or if the police are just going to come in and beat the shit out of everyone, which they already have. There are so many fucking angles on this, and it's hard to just take one. But I thought this piece captured some of them, and I wanted to get this out. So here's a little bit from, again, Financial Times today about The contradictions on American college campuses. America is in knots over the foolishness, or worse, of its campus protesters, but it is adults who are making the biggest dunces of themselves. The role of grown-ups facing student unrest is to keep the peace without sacrificing rights. These include free speech and physical safety. The task requires principled consistency. In practice, adults from all walks, Republicans, Democrats, the media, and university administrations, are exhibiting traits of hysteria and dogmatism they deplore in the young. It should come as no surprise that the protests are getting angrier. Students have every right to protest, even with speech that many of their peers find abhorrent. One person's outrage over the killing of thousands of civilians in Gaza might be another's call for the elimination of Jews from Israel. Some of the demonstrators consciously subscribe to a Hamas worldview that would wipe Israel off the map. At what point does anti-Zionism become anti-Semitism? The line is blurry, but most people, except those in charge apparently, can tell the difference between lawful protest and calls to violence. The blame for this mess is broadly shared. Among Democrats, the protests have sparked fears of a repeat of 1968. Like then, the current unrest began at Columbia University. As in 68, this year's Democratic Convention will be held in Chicago. But that's where the parallels end. The 1968 convention was a disaster for two reasons. First, Democrats were deeply split over Vietnam. Today's left is angry with Joe Biden for being too soft on Netanyahu's government. But this is nothing like Vietnam. No American troops are dying, and most of the criticisms of Biden are that he's too weak. Protesters in 68 likened Hubert Humphrey, the Democratic nominee, to Hitler and Hirohito. Humphrey's chief rival, Eugene McCarthy, refused to endorse him. Biden will be the unanimous choice of his party. The chief driver of these protests is humanitarian. It would be far more worrying if the young were indifferent to the deaths of thousands of children, some of them at hands of U.S.-supplied munitions. The same was true of those who signed up to Maoism in 1968. They had no clue what it was like to be caught up in China's Cultural Revolution or about life in Ho Chi Minh's North Vietnam, but the fringe's posturing did not impugn the broader revulsion over a misguided war that was wasting young lives. So this is me again, sorry, I'm interrupting the piece, just to say, that's a point that I really, really wanted to make last week when we had Justin on the show, last week's episode. The idea of sort of the differences and similarities between the Vietnam years and what's happening now, but also the kind of like, let's not get lost in the sauce of like who's supporting Hamas, etc. Are those bars? Let's not get lost in the sauce of who's supporting Hamas. But what I really mean by that is, we can sit here and talk about the Jane Fonda moment in which she, gets photographed, with the enemy holding their weapons aimed at American soldiers, and that sort of radicalism that turned everybody off or turned a lot of people off. There's also just like I think the basic reason is that people are mad, and that young people especially are mad, is because they're seeing death. Like, beyond all the politics, beyond all the revolutionary posturing, the basic idea of civilians being slaughtered, and you're seeing it on TikTok. Like, I don't know if you've seen what I've seen. I have seen a lot of the dead kids and the crying kids and the fucking blood and guts splattered everywhere. And I'm sure that young people on college campuses that are involved in these protests are seeing that shit too. It's fucking gut-wrenching. It's disgusting. The fact that your government is involved in it makes you honestly feel insane and powerless. I get all of that. I've been dealing with those feelings for a long, long fucking time. And that's what I'm trying to remember here, is that at base, when you see people saying radical shit, whatever, it's kind of like the George Floyd thing. It does drive you crazy to see that kind of violence and feel like you're implicated in it one way or the other. Where it's all going and how that energy gets sustained into a practical program to actually address the genocide is a whole other question. And I think that's where you can get easily lost in the sauce. It's kind of like, okay, we're all pissed. We're all disgusted by what's going on. But how do we affect any change? Okay, continuing. Let's talk about how fucking inept the university administrators are and the NYPD and all of that. Here's continuing the Financial Times. The panic of many university administrations, including Columbia's, has needlessly fanned the flames. Columbia's initial decision last week to call in the New York police to eject the protesters was misguided. As the NYPD made clear, the students were nonviolent, but they could be forgiven for being confused. Universities have for years promoted a worldview that endorses a hierarchy of suffering, which ranks people according to collective racial guilt or victimhood. The more elite the university, the worse it is. Since October 7th, that's been boomeranging. It's adults who have been implicitly put Jews on the guilt side of that ledger. It's humanities schools that have validated the idea that speech is violence. Okay, so I just want to pause there again. The contradictions there are great. I love it. It's kind of like the idea that, we are promoting ideas that don't necessarily go together here, especially when we're sort of playing the oppression Olympics. The idea that people can be grouped according to the historical oppression they have either meted out upon others or experienced themselves, and therefore that should have some sort of bearing on how we treat them in schools and in corporations today. That's the root of it. The sort of like, we're going to correct the record somehow of racial and gender and sexual and even oppression of disabled people, etc., by somehow rejiggering the college. And, to me, there's a noble effort there. I'm not going to jump on the fucking right-wing anti-DEI thing. But the other end of it is that there are deep questions about all of this shit, about whether or not it actually works or whether or not it actually makes things worse. And to me, seeing the kind of confusion about whether or not speech is violence, whether or not oppressors deserve to be killed, etc., among young people is partly a product of a society that's very, very confused about what it wants to do about these issues. And college campuses, they're sort of ground zero of the kind of we're doing something about it, the diversity workshops, etc. And I think that they have done a lot to sort of muddy the waters of young people, especially thinking about how actually to mitigate the very real violence that emerges out of the awful global situation that we're in. And I think that, that part of it is something that we'll be talking about in the future. And here's the kicker on that from the Financial Times. Many speculate that today's protests could mark the death knell of campus identity politics. That would be a silver lining, though it's unlikely to happen soon. But there's also an elephant in the room. Those calling the loudest for protesters to be removed and even locked up are on the right. They include Donald Trump. Until yesterday, conservatives were the harshest critics of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and the lack of free speech on campus. Now they want to stamp it out. The hypocrisy is too mild a word to capture such a switch. Many of the same politicians are calling for the January 6th felons to be pardoned for having tried to overthrow an election. And again, I don't mean to toot our own horn, but we were talking about exactly this shit last week. The fucking Elon Musk of the world who are like, well, I guess there's no such thing as free speech anymore. I guess comedy is illegal, and saying all sorts of fucking stupid shit like that are the same people who are like, these campus kids should be shut down by the NYPD. They shouldn't be allowed to say the shit that they're saying about Israel and Gaza and Palestine. So hypocrisy, again, is too mild a word. I have nothing but contempt for people like Elon Musk and all the fucking conservatives who now look at these campus protesters and want to throw the cops in there and fucking jack off as the cops beat them up. Fuck you all. You're a bunch of fucking asshole hypocrites who don't care about free speech whatsoever. And I know you're probably not listening to Nostalgia Trap anyway, so I'm going to stop yelling at the straw man, right-wing free speech warrior. Fuck off with that shit. You believe in free speech to the extent of the people saying speech that you fucking like, and that's it. Fuck off. Okay. So there's a lot going on, guys, and I've gone much longer than I intended to go with News Trap today. I wonder what all of you think about this. I think I've laid out a lot of impossible contradictions here, but to me, what's happening on college campuses is sort of the flashpoint of a much deeper situation. To me, just to wrap up everything I've said today, how are these young people going to, and how are university administrators and the NYPD, how are they going to wrap their minds around a world war involving China, right? Like, if we're really going to move forward with a kind of very simplistic vision of oppressors and the oppressed and whatever, things are going to get real muddy when there's a world war. And that part of it is something I think about a lot. I wonder what all of you think about that. I'll be looking for your thoughts in the comments, etc. And again, if you are a Nostalgia Trap listener on the main feed and you want to get into the News Trap stuff, please subscribe. The link is in the episode description. We'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.